The final chapter of Brigitte Bardot's life wasn't written on a red carpet, in front of cameras, or surrounded by applause. It unfolded quietly, shaped by distance, controversy, and a legacy that refuses to be simple. In her last years, the woman who once defined freedom, beauty, and rebellion lived far from the image the world never stopped projecting onto her. And what happened around her final days reveals more about her life and her contradictions than any headline ever could. The moment the news became public, reactions poured in from every direction: cinema, politics, fashion, and animal welfare. But the story surrounding Brigitte Bardot's final chapter isn't just about mourning a legend. It's about how a cultural icon slowly stepped away from the world, while the world never quite stepped away from her. According to publicly available information, Bardot spent her final years largely out of the public eye, living in the south of France. There were no major public appearances, no farewell interviews, no carefully staged final message. And that silence was intentional, because for decades, Brigitte Bardot had been redefining what it meant to leave the spotlight, long before the world was ready to let her go. And that decision goes back much further than most people realize. To understand the meaning of her final days, you first have to understand why she walked away at the height of her fame and what that choice cost her. By the early 1970s, Bardot had already become more than an actress. She was a global symbol, not just of French cinema, but of liberation itself. Films like And God Created Woman didn't simply entertain audiences. They challenged social norms. They sparked debates. They unsettled entire cultures. And yet, at just 39 years old, Bardot did something almost unthinkable. She retired, not gradually, not taking a break. She walked away completely. At the time, many believed it was temporary. Some thought it was a publicity move. Others assumed she would return once the offers became too big to ignore. She never did. According to interviews and statements from that period, Bardot felt trapped by the image that had been built around her. She was relentlessly marketed as a symbol of desire, often at the expense of her own ambitions as a serious actress. Behind the scenes, that pressure came with exhaustion, frustration, and a deep sense of disconnection from the industry that made her famous. So she chose something radically different: animals. In Bardot's own words, she had given her youth to people and decided to give the rest of her life to protecting those who had no voice. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. In 1986, she founded what would later become one of France's most recognizable animal welfare organizations, the Brigitte Bardot Foundation. From that moment on, her life took a sharp turn away from cinema and toward activism. But that transformation came with consequences, and over time, it would reshape how the public viewed her, especially in her final years. As the decades passed, Bardot remained a powerful figure in animal rights circles. She funded campaigns. She wrote letters to political leaders. She spoke out, often bluntly, against practices she believed were cruel. Animal protection groups continued to praise her dedication, describing her as relentless, passionate, and unwavering. Yet at the same time, her public statements on unrelated topics began to dominate the conversation around her name. According to court records and reporting from French media, Bardot was fined multiple times for comments that were widely criticized and legally challenged. These remarks, made later in life, significantly impacted her public reputation and shifted how many people engaged with her legacy. For some, This created a difficult contradiction. How could someone capable of such compassion toward animals become a figure of controversy in public discourse? And more importantly, how did that tension shape the way her final years were lived and remembered? Because when Brigitte Bardot's death was announced, the reactions revealed something deeper than grief. They exposed how divided her legacy had become and how carefully many tributes were worded. And that's where the story truly becomes complicated. When the announcement of Brigitte Bardot's death became public, the response was immediate, but notably measured. There were no dramatic press conferences, no chaotic media frenzy at her doorstep. Instead, there was a careful pause, almost as if the world needed a moment to decide how to talk about her. French President Emmanuel Macron was among the first major figures to respond, calling Bardot a legend of the century and highlighting her cultural impact, her films, and her symbolic place in French history. His message focused on art, identity, and freedom, themes long associated with her name. Notably, it avoided controversy. That choice reflected something important. In her final chapter, public tributes became exercises in balance. Because behind every official statement, there was an unspoken question. What parts of her life define her legacy now? Other reactions followed a similar pattern. Figures from cinema and culture emphasized her influence on fashion, film, and global perception of French femininity. Animal welfare organizations highlighted decades of activism, crediting her with bringing international attention to causes that had once been considered niche. France's oldest animal protection association described her as an iconic and passionate figure for the animal cause. Again, the language was deliberate, respectful, focused, selective. But not everyone framed their response the same way. Some political figures offered praise centered on her personality, her frankness, her refusal to conform, her independence. These reactions, while positive, reignited debate about whether directness should be separated from responsibility. And once again, Bardot's name quietly reopened conversations that had followed her for years. The silence of the family. While public figures spoke, Bardot's family remained largely silent. According to available reports, no detailed public statement was issued specifying the exact circumstances, location, or timeline of her passing. This absence of detail wasn't accidental. Throughout her later life, Bardot had fiercely protected her privacy. She lived away from Paris, away from premieres, away from interviews. That same boundary seemed to remain intact even after her death. Her husband, Bernard Dormal, whom she married in 1992, did not step forward into the spotlight. Neither did other close family members. And that silence became part of the story. Because for someone whose image once belonged to the entire world, privacy, at the very end, may have been the one thing she fully reclaimed. But there was one relationship that complicated this quiet ending: her relationship with her only son. Brigitte Bardot had one child, Nicolas, from her marriage to actor and producer Jacques Charrier. Their relationship, as documented through interviews and legal records, was strained for decades. In a widely reported case, Nicolas sued his mother for emotional damage following statements she made in her autobiography, comments that sparked public debate and media attention at the time. Those remarks became one of the most cited examples of Bardot's blunt honesty and the personal cost of it. In her final years, there was no public reconciliation announced, no visible closure offered to the press. And when news of her death broke, Nicolas did not make a prominent public appearance. For many observers, that absence underscored a recurring theme in Bardot's life. Fame could amplify everything, including distance. Coverage of Bardot's death followed an unusual pattern. Most outlets avoided sensational language. Instead of dramatic headlines, they opted for reflection. Her films were listed. Her foundation was mentioned. Her influence was acknowledged. At the same time, many reports carefully referenced her later controversies using neutral phrasing. Remarks that damaged her reputation, comments that led to legal consequences, a legacy that remains debated. Words like allegedly, according to court rulings, and publicly reported appeared frequently. This wasn't censorship. It was caution, because Bardot's story resists simple framing, and that's where the real tension lies. Not in how she died, but in how history will remember her. For some, Brigitte Bardot will always be the face that redefined cinema in the 1950s, the woman who stood barefoot on screen and changed how femininity was portrayed. For others, she represents the risks of refusing to evolve publicly, of holding on to views that increasingly clashed with a changing society. And for many, she is both, a symbol of freedom and a reminder that freedom without reflection can divide. That duality shaped the tone of her final chapter. Quiet, complex, unresolved. But perhaps the most revealing part of this story isn't found in tributes or controversies. It's found in the choice she made decades earlier, to leave the spotlight forever. And that decision may explain why her ending felt so different from other cultural icons. Because Brigitte Bardot didn't fade away. She stepped aside. And the world never stopped trying to understand why. To understand Brigitte Bardot's final chapter, you have to look at the decision that defined the second half of her life. Not her most famous role, not her most controversial quote, but her choice to disappear while still being one of the most recognizable women on the planet. When Bardot retired in the early 1970s, celebrity culture as we know it today didn't exist. There was no social media, no constant online presence, no expectation of lifelong access. Walking away meant exactly that, silence, and she accepted the cost.